Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're trying to unpack something that, well, it feels like it just exploded onto the scene, but honestly still leaves a lot of people kind of scratching their heads. How does Bitcoin actually work? And, what is this blockchain thing we hear about constantly?
Yeah, it's definitely a topic. We've gathered the source material for you, articles, some research papers, notes, basically, to help guide us through this. Our aim isn't just like dictionary definitions. We want to pull out the real insights from these sources.
Exactly. Think of this deep dive as maybe your way to really get the fundamentals without needing, a PhD in computer science. So what's the absolute core idea our sources give us about Bitcoin right at the start?
Well, the sources mostly simplify it down.
Mm.
It's most basic. They talk about Bitcoin as digital money, almost like cash, but for the internet.
Digital cash. Okay, I can grasp that.
Yeah.
And its origins, where did it pop up from?
It first showed up, believe it or not, back in 2009. Created by this really mysterious person, or maybe it was a group. They're just known as Satoshi Nakamoto.
Right, the mystery founder. And what's the really standout feature the sources emphasize about how it operates?
I think the absolute core design principle, according to the sources, is this. No banks, zero middlemen involved. It's meant to be purely peer-to-peer.
Peer-to-peer.
Yeah, so if you want to send value to someone else, the idea is you can potentially just do it directly, person to person.
No banks involved at all.
Yeah.
Well, that's fundamentally different from everything we use daily. So I could just send it almost like an email, maybe, and keep it somewhere safe.
Pretty much, yeah. You can send it, you can receive it, and you store it in what's called a digital wallet. It acts like money in those basic ways.
But the sources are pretty clear on this, aren't they? The actual breakthrough, the thing that makes it all hang together and stay secure, it isn't just the coin itself, it's the technology underneath this blockchain.
That's absolutely the core insight. This sort of magic, if you will, isn't the Bitcoin token, it's the ledger system.
Yeah.
And actually, our sources use a really good analogy to explain blockchain in plain English.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the analogy?
Okay, so imagine a massive shared notebook, like a huge ledger book.
Yeah.
And this notebook, it's completely open, visible to everyone on the network. Anyone can add new lines, new entries into it. But, and this is the really critical part, the sources stress, once something is written down and confirmed in this notebook, you absolutely cannot go back. No erasing, no crossing out, no faking earlier entries.
Just a public notebook that nobody can tamper with once something's written down. That's the blockchain.
That's the essence of it, yeah. It's a digital ledger. Every single Bitcoin transaction that ever happens, sending Bitcoin from wallet A to wallet B, it gets recorded there.
And how are these recordings organized? The source mentioned something about pages.
Right. It uses this analogy of pages in a book. Each page in the blockchain context is called a block. It fills up with records of recent transactions. Once that page, that block, is full, and everyone agrees it's correct.
Okay, wait. So a block, fills up with transactions.
Right.
Then what happens?
Then that page gets digitally sealed. It's finalized. And then a brand new page, a new block, is started right after it. And all these sealed pages, all these blocks, are linked together chronologically, one right after the other, in order.
Ah, like links in a chain.
Exactly like links in a chain. So you had these blocks of information chained together, blockchain. That's literally where the name comes from.
Okay, got it. Digital notebook, open to everyone, can't erase things, pages get filled, sealed, and linked together like a chain. It sounds, well, almost straightforward when you put it like that. So why do our sources talk about this being so revolutionary? What makes this seemingly simple idea so powerful?
Yeah, this is where we get into the really key properties that the sources highlight. There are a few fundamental things that give blockchain its unique strength.
Okay, like what? What's the first big one they point to?
The sources really hammer home that it's decentralized.
Decentralized. Okay, what does that actually mean in practice for our public notebook analogy?
It means, basically, as the sources explained it, that there isn't one single company or one government or any single entity that owns or controls this notebook. It's not sitting on one bank server somewhere. Instead, the network that runs and verifies this ledger is distributed across thousands, maybe even millions, of computers all over the world, all working together.
Wow. So there's no central command, no single place you could attack or shut down.
Exactly. No single point of failure. That's a huge part of it. Another key property the sources mention is transparency.
Transparency. Because it's public.
Right. Because it's that shared public notebook. Anyone, anywhere can theoretically look at the entire history of Bitcoin transactions.
Yeah.
All the way back to the very first one in 2009. It's all there. permanently.
The entire history. So I could literally go and see every transaction ever made.
You could see the record of every transaction, yes. Now, the identities involved are typically pseudonymous-like, represented by wallet addresses, which are long strings of characters, not necessarily your name. But the transaction itself, the movement of Bitcoin from one address to another, that's visible on the public ledger forever.
Okay. And the third property, you mentioned security. How does a public notebook stay secure? Couldn't someone just try to change an old entry?
That's where the cryptography comes in, which is really the technical core here, according to the sources. Each block, each page of transactions, is mathematically locked or sealed using complex cryptographic techniques. And crucially, when a new block is added, it contains a kind of digital fingerprint or hash that links it directly back to the previous block.
Like a unique seal that depends on the block before it.
Precisely. So if you wanted to go back and tamper with a transaction in, say, block number 100, you wouldn't just have to break the cryptographic seal on block 100. You'd also invalidate the link to block 101 and 102 and so on. You'd have to recalculate the incredibly difficult math for every single block that came after the one you altered. And our sources are clear. Doing this across the entire decentralized network faster than new blocks are being added, honestly. It's considered computationally infeasible. Basically impossible in practice.
So it's not theoretically 100% impossible, but practically speaking, trying to rewrite the blockchain history would need an absurd amount of computing power, more than anyone is likely to have.
That's the fundamental insight, yeah. The collective computing power securing the chain makes tampering incredibly difficult and expensive.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Another term you hear all the time is mining. Now, when people hear Bitcoin mining, they probably imagine, digging in the ground. But our sources say that's obviously not what's happening here.
Not at all, no. The sources are very clear. Mining in the Bitcoin world refers to something very specific. It's the process of solving an extremely difficult computational puzzle.
A puzzle? Okay, who's solving it and why? What's the point of the puzzle?
So there are people all over the globe, we call them miners, using very powerful, specialized computers. They're all competing against each other to be the first to solve a complex mathematical problem. And this problem is directly linked to the latest batch or block of pending Bitcoin transactions. It's not just random math, though. Solving this puzzle is actually the way the network verifies those transactions are legitimate and agrees on adding the new block to the chain.
Okay, so miners are kind of like digital auditors, verifying transactions by racing to solve this hard math problem. What do they get out of it? Why use all that expensive hardware and electricity?
That's the really clever incentive mechanism the sources highlight. The very first miner who successfully finds the solution to the puzzle gets a specific reward. They get the right to add the next validated block of transactions onto the blockchain. And for doing that work, they're rewarded with brand new Bitcoin.
So that's how new Bitcoin is created.
Exactly. This mining process is the only way new Bitcoin enters circulation up until that maximum cap of 21 million coins is reached. Plus, they usually also collect the small transaction fees that people included with their transactions in that block.
So mining does two crucial things then. It secures the network by validating everything and adding new blocks. And it's also the mechanism for creating and distributing new Bitcoin.
Precisely. It's this dual-purpose engine that keeps the whole system running and secure, according to the design outlined in the sources.
Like a self-regulating system almost.
That's a good way to think about the incentive structure described, yes.
Okay, so we've covered what Bitcoin is digital cash, what blockchain is that public unchangeable ledger, why it's special, decentralized, transparent, secure, and how mining works solving puzzles to verify and get rewarded. Let's bring this all back home for the listener. Why does all this technical stuff actually matter? What's the real-world relevance that our sources point to?
Well, the sources usually hit on a few key implications. First, it provides a potential way to send value, money, essentially, anywhere in the world, and potentially quite quickly, like in minutes, operating 24/7, unlike traditional banking hours.
And what's the really disruptive part about how you can send it, based on the sources?
The big thing is that you can potentially do it without needing a traditional bank account. You might avoid high international transfer fees, and perhaps most significantly, it operates outside the direct control or potential censorship of a single government or financial institution.
Right, that goes back to the decentralization point. It's a system fundamentally designed to be independent.
Exactly. Another huge point the sources consistently raise is that fixed supply we mentioned earlier. Only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist, period. This programmed scarcity leads to different ways people think about its value.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people call it digital gold. Why do the sources suggest some people see it that way? What's the comparison?
The sources draw a parallel. Like physical gold, Bitcoin has a strictly limited supply. Unlike national currencies, which governments can print more of whenever they decide, potentially causing inflation, Bitcoin's supply is fixed. So proponents argue this makes it a potential store of value, something that might hold its worth over time, or even act as a hedge against inflation.
So that absolute scarcity, that 21 million cap, is the core of the digital gold or anti-inflation argument we see in the sources.
That's the fundamental characteristic they point to. For those perspectives, yes. But, for others, as the sources also note, it's viewed very differently, maybe just as a new type of investment asset, albeit a very volatile one.
And beyond just holding it like gold or an investment, can you actually, use it for things?
Yes, absolutely. The sources mention you can use it to pay for goods and services, especially online, though maybe not everywhere yet. And more broadly, some see it as a way to participate in what they believe is a whole new global financial infrastructure being built alongside the traditional system.
Okay, so let's try to wrap up this deep dive then, if we boil it down. Bitcoin is essentially digital money,
Right. And it works because of the blockchain technology underneath it.
which our sources describe as that incredible public, sort of unerasable, decentralized, and cryptographically secure digital ledger, keeping track of every transaction.
And it's kept secure and updated by miners who solve those complex puzzles.
And get rewarded with new Bitcoin for their trouble.
It's a whole system designed, really, to allow for peer-to-peer value transfer, potentially cutting out the traditional middlemen, the gatekeepers. And that fixed supply gives it characteristics very different from the money we're used to.
The sources make it clear it's complicated, it's definitely not perfect, and there are lots of debates around it. But the core technology and the ideas behind it, they are pretty revolutionary. So hopefully you now have a much more solid handle on these fundamentals.
Definitely. And maybe just to leave you with a final thought, something to chew on based on what we've discussed from the sources. Think about this. What are the really long-term consequences for global finance, for banks, for governments, even for individual freedom, when a system exists that was specifically engineered from the ground up to bypass those traditional financial gatekeepers?
Yeah.
Or maybe consider this. What does digital scarcity truly mean for our concept of value? When you have an asset like Bitcoin, where there's an absolute unchangeable limit of only 21 million units ever in a world that's becoming more and more digital.
Those are definitely some big questions that spin directly out of understanding these basic building blocks. Plenty to think about until our next deep dive.